everyone, this is Marina from Frocks Frolics, and I'm going to show you how to sew the Dakota coat without a lining. And for this we need the front twice and the back on the fold once, the sleeves twice, the collar twice on the fold, the cuffs twice on the fold, and finally the back facing once on the fold. And then if you cut the front facing off and use that to cut out your violin as well, that would be great. And now we're ready. We've already prepared some of the stuff for this coat, and that's to be seen in different videos. For example, the beautiful welt pocket, there's a separate video and it's 20 minutes long, so I didn't want to have that in there as well. And if you're using that pocket, then you can just trim off the easy side pockets we normally do with this coat. So let's get started. You can see here in the front I've already put the buttonholes in as well, and we have a separate video for that. So we start by overlocking the shoulder seams and the side seams. And on the sleeve we just overlock that lower edge. And on the cuffs you want to overlock both sides. And then we're going to put this on and sew it on, and then it can be folded up and it'll look really, really cute. So we place that on top of each other and put it away for a minute. And we're going to start by closing the shoulder seams and the side seams. The shoulder in the back is a little bit wider than the front. That's so it sits better. So you need to make sure you ease that in. 1 centimeter seam allowance as on all my patterns. And then if you hold the hem in your hand and then sort of guide the fabric so they're like on top of each other, edge to edge, try to do it without pins. You don't always need pins, and it's so much faster. And here as you come down for the spring coat, I would recommend that you ease it in to the width of the overlocking, because it's actually a little bit tighter than the top, and as you put it up, it will be a little bit tight if you don't do that. And then we iron the seams apart, and here where we've got that, you'll see it in a minute why that is. I'm also snipping it so that it is easier to iron and it's easier to put together. So we'll iron first the bottom part towards the hem there, and then we can put it over the edge of the ironing board and iron the rest so it's not difficult. And then we can also cut a little bit more away from the seam allowance to make it sit better. And you can see here that it's very pointy, and that's because on a winter coat we actually do want the hem to be a little bit tighter because you're probably using thick fabric, but on the spring coat you don't have that. So actually if you ease it out to the overlocking, that distance, it'll be perfect. And if you want to turn in the hem, like I'm doing now, not overlocking and just stitching it down, you want to snip in there so you can turn it in later 1 centimeter. So that's the hem. And now we're going to put a bias binding strip on the edge of the facing from the front. And that'll make it look really nice. You can just overlock it and turn it in, but I think this is heaps better. And we're just sewing this onto the edge. The shorter edge of your bias binding has to be the one that sits on the top and the wider one underneath it, so it makes sure that you catch it all. And so that's it. It looks all beautiful. And then we do the same on the back facing. We put the bias binding on because it looks good. You could also put that bias binding onto the hem, of course. I didn't do that because I'd run out. And also I have to say that in the UK you get these awfully pretty bias bindings, and I don't see them here very often. I'd have to say the US is behind, and especially Joann's does not do very nice bias binding. It's about time they did. And then if you have your own label, you can put that on. Mine still says made in England, bespoke. I don't even do that anymore, and I now live in LA. But anyway, the next step is to take the back facing and put it onto the front facings, and we're going to close the shoulder seams for that as well. and then it will roll around like that, and that looks really cool, and the collar will just be stuck in between those layers that we've just created. So close the shoulder seam, and now we've got this round really. We iron the seams apart, and we're ready to do our collar really. So I'm just folding the front down here so that you can see to what point we've got to now. I think it looks absolutely cool already. I so love this fabric, it's beautiful. And then we're going to put on the Violin to the collar, and this is what we call the under collar. It's got the Violin on. They're both the same size. Put the upper collar over the top, right hand sides facing, but when we're sewing the collar together, we want to sew it from the side that has the Violin ironed on it. It's much easier to sew from that side. If you ever tried it from the other side, you'll soon find out the fabric pushes. And then we go, leaving obviously the neckline open, and then we go up stitch length 2, and then we reduce that to stitch length 1 just as we get into the corner, so that when I cut it back really well, that it doesn't fray out, because that is annoying if that happens. So, and again we do the same on the other side. We get there, then needle down, turn, small stitch length, and then make the stitch length bigger, and well, finish off. Next, we're just going to cut across the corners, and then we're going to cut back the seam allowances in stages so that when you turn it, it's all flatter. And we do that for the entire collar. And we can then turn the collar and move out with a needle, or pin, the corner, and if you are pushed out too much, you can push it back in as well. And then you want to iron it. First iron up the seam here. It doesn't matter which way round it is, it's just a matter of making it easier to iron now. And then you wiggle out the seam, make sure you iron from the side which is the top of the collar, which doesn't have the Violin on it. And then if we fold the collar around, that's what you want. You don't want the edges to peep up. And in order to make that sit like that, we push back the upper collar, and we're going to pin it. You should really have that as a habit. You should always do that. Some people have different sizes anyway in the collar. They give you an under and an upper collar. But I do find that people get confused which one goes up and which one goes down, and it's quite easy to remember it like that, and really no hardship to push it all up 3 millimeters is it. And then you can sew across the bottom edge, and now when I fold this again, you see that it just will stay like that. It's beautiful. Now I'm going to top stitch this, but you can leave this to the end and then top stitch the front and the collar in one go. But when you top stitch it now, make sure that you don't push the fabric that's now extra on the top collar over while you're top stitching. Make sure that your seam is directly in the edge there, and that you don't let the top stuff push over a little bit. I've put in some threads here just into the corner so I can pull it to kingdom come really, so that my machine doesn't get stuck. My machine is actually quite good. Doesn't often get stuck, but if you have a cheaper machine, you're just a beginner, then it will no doubt happen. So these threads just pushed through across the corner will really help you. So you turn it and then you really pull those threads to go down so that your stitch length doesn't start hammering in one place and it looks uneven and unprofessional. All the way down. Now the collar is ready to be put in. We're putting it against the actual back first, and you can see the upper collar has to face you, the bit where we have a little bit more fabric. And then we also put shoulder seams onto the snip that is on the collar. It's all marked, so don't forget when you prepare all your fabrics to snip it. And of course you can go back and watch the introduction, right, so that you know what to cut, where to cut it and all that, and what to snip. So in the front you've got a snip as where to touch the collar, and the collar actually sits slightly back from that. So if you go down from where the snip is, the start of the collar needs to be in line with that, with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And I would also recommend that once you've pinned it, you check the front on both sides. Make sure that the distance to the center front and to the collar is exactly the same on both sides, because obviously there's a reason why I'm saying it to you now, because I didn't check it. I've always checked, I didn't check, and I had to unpick it all, and I had it cut back already. Absolute nightmare. Then also make sure that you put all these pins vertical to the seam so that nothing can pleat, and then we're just going to sew it in with a seam allowance of foot width, so that when I do my second stitching line in a minute, I cover this stitch and it doesn't show. That's what we want really. So just foot width. And then when that's done, the beauty is I can just sandwich this in now. So just put the center back on the center back. Yeah, so it's the facing of the center back and the center back and the shoulders go on top of each other, and then the front cut back if your welt buttonhole is in the way. And you can see here it almost looks like a little crease I've got on the front, and that's because the collar is at such an angle that it will interfere with the center front while you're sewing this. So if you fold it back and then pin that into place, then it's all straight and you can just pin this across and it's easy. You want to also secure your shoulder seams, make sure that they don't fold over. It's not a big deal if they do, we just snip them, but it's obviously better if you do it beautifully. And then you sew it all the way across. Check that you have no pleats in. If you do, you need to undo it. I was lucky in this case. That tension on the shoulders, so after I've sewn this, I'm snipping into that point on both sides so it doesn't do that. I have that every time. I know you're not meant to do that, and you probably can get it right without, but this is one of the Marina specials, same as leaving the pin on the underarm and then sending stuff out to models. That's the other thing I do. So always check for the pin. I had quite a reputation when I used to do stuff as an apprentice, and it would go out to those fashion models and I'll go, who sewed this? And if it was me, they would look for pins. So anyway, you work out your corners here in the front, make sure it's all out. And then you press just a little bit in the front, not all the way down, we just want a little bit. And then we'll press the collar itself. So I would move it so it sits on the edge of your ironing board so you don't accidentally iron in some pleats. That would not be good. All the way to the other side. And then we put the shoulder seams really flush on top of each other and pin it. We're going to sew those facings to the armhole, so it needs to be bang straight. And on the back, you want to make very sure that you don't have a pull on here. It needs to be like really straight. So again, we pin that as well, and then we sew it in, and we can cut back what stands over the edge. Front, we do obviously the same. That's why we were ironing it a little bit on the front, so it's easier to do. Now I've sewn it, and that little bit that stands over, we cut away. Now this is what the hem should like, the whole front. So how do we do this? Beautiful finish, very simple technique. You take the front facing and you fold it over, you measure up your 4 centimeters, that's your seam allowance here, and then you connect it, and we're going to stitch this along that line. It's beautiful. All done. Now all I have to do is cut back my seam allowance. I tell you, when I was an apprentice, all these things got me so scared, like cutting into there. I wish I had videos like this to help me out. I'd be going, I'm cutting now, miss, I'm cutting. And she'd go, this is Frau Tucker, who used to train me. She says, just cut it, Marina, she'd say. Just cut it. And anyway, we can do the hem now. And I'm turning it in here. And it needs to be 3 centimeters up and 1 centimeter turned in. Alternatively, you can overlock it and you have the 4 centimeters up, or you could bias bind it as well, whatever you like. To make sure that I get my stitching right on the right distance from the edge, I've put a business card on it and just sellotaped it down so that on the other side it's easier to see where I have to go, because I haven't got the lines to the front of my needle plate that show me the distance. Anyway, while you're sewing along, I would stretch the fabric a bit, and I would also take the pins out, not because the pin or the needle might break, but because you get like little loops over the pin, and that loop will show then underneath on the outside when you turn it over. I don't know if you'd experienced that. I'd be interested to know which machine doesn't do that, but mine definitely does. So it's better to take the pins out. Now we're going to do the sleeve. So you attach the sleeve here, 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm not going to show this, we're just going to sew it and then we're going to come back. Next, we're going to top stitch either side, and I would recommend that you do a stitch length of 3.5. That's a good one to do. I think I didn't do that here. I think you can see it's a little bit smaller and it just looks more professional and shop made when you have a longer stitch length. You just go around at the top, you know, swivel it round and then come back on the other side, and it's actually really simple to do and it looks very, very nice. Now we're going to overlock the sides so that we can put our sleeve together, and we're also going to put some gather stitches in the top. So I'm doing 2 lines. One is 1 centimeter from the edge and one is close to the edge, so that we can then pull it and steam it in. Now the idea is to round the sleeve head a bit. So what you want to do is pull both those threads. When I work with wool, I only put in 1 thread on that 1 centimeter distance, the same distance as my stitching will be, so I'm stitching right on that line again. With this fabric, it was half synthetic. We've got lycra, we've got a very tight twill weave here, so steaming this in was near impossible. So if you have a fabric like that, don't try to get it under. For a wool coat, absolutely beautiful. It's got to be big. You know, you're going to have a cardi maybe underneath it. But for a coat like this, where you can't get it under, don't even try, but gather it. But for wool, it's a fantastic method to steam it in first, and then it'll go in easier and it'll sit really well. The next step is to close the seam. Make sure that the cuff ends are on top of each other so that you don't have that at a different height. Put a pin vertical to the seam there, and then we're stitching this down again, 1 centimeter seam allowance as always. Next we're going to iron it out as you do, and then just simply pull up your cuff. Bear in mind that your cuff is going to be not as long as mine. I changed that after I did the video. It was a little bit long. And also do the lower edge really well. Press it in so it all sits exactly where it needs to sit. And then we're pinning 5 or 6 centimeters below the edge, just to hold it in place, because we're going to do some stitching now. So you tuck in your sleeve all the way, and then we're going to stitch from the seam all the way around to the seam again. You can't go just right next to the seam, but you can catch as much as you can. And then we're stitching the seam allowances together, and that will hold it in place. You can't see it from the outside. If you wanted to stitch from the outside, you'd remove the arm, slide it on, and then just stitch in the ditch, I think some people call it. but this would be very difficult on a very small children's coat, and this you could even do by hand if you couldn't get in on the 2-year-old, for example. Then remove your pins again, you know, pull it down, give it a good press if you like, and you're practically done. I would also now sew around the hem so that we've got a really nice structural end to that, and when we turn it up it looks really good. Larger stitch length again, make sure that it's not too close to the edge either. It doesn't look very good when you do that. You can fold up your cuff and you are done. Now we can put the sleeve in. The snip for the front is right there, so I'm going to go through here now and then put this left sleeve into the left armhole, pin it onto the underarm seam, and then the shoulder seam goes onto the sleeve head. And the key to putting a good sleeve in is to bring it in flat. I would say the width of 2 pins at the lower end of your sleeve, and then you put the rest in. Now what you're going to see now is that there's actually lots to be held in on this, because this is originally a winter coat. So for this I would recommend you bring it in flat, like I just said, for those 2.5 pins, and then the top you just gather, because you've got enough there to make it look really cute with gathers. You want the width of this, and I don't want to change the sleeve because it actually sits absolutely beautiful. So just gather it at the top and it'll fit in perfect if you have a fabric that does what mine did and drive me crazy. I made 2 coats, and on the other coat I actually managed to get it under, and it does look really nice. But if after 25 years of putting in sleeves I'm struggling, I would tell you don't struggle. And like I said, when I made this second coat, I thought, what, I'm not doing that again. And I gathered it and I was really, really pleased with it because it looks very nice. Now we're going to just stitch it in all the way around. And make sure that you always have it really flat underneath. Take the pins out only as you literally come on top of them, and not too early, because it really does hold it in place. You can also use the pins you take out to then adjust your gathers. I always do that, so I take it out, adjust the gathers, and then fling it onto my magnet. And the proper adjustment of all these gathers usually happens when I'm sewing. So you can see it here, I move it up a bit, I move it down a bit, and when I'm happy with it, that's when I stitch over it. There we go, all done. And there you are. You can see it's about 2 centimeters to either side, and it looks really, really cute. So no need to kill yourself over a sleeve that you can't get in. Just do it like that if you have fabric like this. This is a denim that I'm using. I'm also going to now attach the pocket to the facing so it can't flop out. So what you want to do is just put a pin in there. You can hand stitch this if you think it might move or you're not sure how to do this, or you push it under the sewing machine backwards and forwards a few times and you're done. Then you can also, while you're on the machine, top stitch the front edge. Now if you have not top stitched your collar, then you can do that now in one go. You just move around, go all the way around the collar and come back down the other side. If you've already top stitched the collar like I have, then you can go around the neckline. That is not quite as easy and maybe not even necessary, but hey presto, I've done it for this one. Because I do sometimes fly by the seat of my pants and just get on with it. So you can stitch that in, and I thought it would be really nice if it was nice and flat in that area. Anyway, right, last thing, we want to put the buttons on. Now the buttons have to sit really nice and loose on the top, which means we're going to do like a little mushroom, a little stem. And that little stem, when we do the button up, because we have more fabric going over it, that can sit in this space, and therefore it won't pull down and look not so nice. So the button sits really nice and beautiful on that coat. Now this is the coat, Dakota, for the spring. Obviously you can make this for the winter. That was what I originally did. And you can make this in all kinds of fabrics. I think this is one of the most versatile pieces I've ever designed. It's really cool. You can make it with a hoodie, or you can make it with a collar, lined or unlined. When I sent my coats to my photographer, Ella Burbick-Brown, she said, oh, I have got a girl that can wear it, but she's 7. So when she put the coat on for a 4.5-year-old, it looked great. Yes, it is a little bit shorter, but because you've got these beautiful cuffs that you can just roll down, it just looks the same, because the shoulders don't really grow massively throughout that age. And here you can see the age 3 to 4 with a hoodie worn by the beautiful Magdalena. And then we had Anna, who wanted this coat and it was too big for her, and you can still see it looks really nice. That's the coat for an 11-year-old. She's 8. And then we have Tina, who actually was too old for these coats, and she wore the age 8, and it's a beautiful shorter jacket for her, and as with 3/4 length sleeves, and it still looks fantastic. So this coat is actually, it's like multi-age and multi-size. I love it, and I hope you will too. If you want to get the pattern for this, here's what you do. You hover with a mouse over the top right hand corner of the video and you see the info button, and if you click on that, it will then take you to number 1, my website, and number 2, the playlist on YouTube, which has all the videos on it. So if you go and click on the website link, which is the top link, then that will take you to the listings page. And on the listings page, if you look down under details and reviews, please leave a review if you bought one of my patterns. You will see the video tab, and you click on that and all the videos for this coat are also there. I think that's a really great new feature of my website, and I'm really proud to present it to you. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.